He called himself my wife's work husband, right to my face at a company dinner, while she smiled like it was funny. I said nothing. I just opened a folder. $43,000. Her signature. His account. By the time he figured out what was coming, it was already done. My name is Patrick Harlan. I'm 56 years old, and for most of my adult life, I was a senior corporate counsel at a mid-sized financial services firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I spent 3 decades learning how systems work, how contracts hold, how liability shifts, how language either protects you or buries you. I was good at it. I was precise. I noticed things. What I should have noticed sooner was Jared Pullen. He joined the company 4 years ago as Director of Strategic Partnerships. Mid-40s, loud handshake, the kind of guy who knew every barista's name and somehow made that seem like a professional skill. He wore slim-fit blazers and carried a Moleskine he never wrote in. He called people brother in the elevator and remembered birthdays with a precision that should have been unsettling. Nadine, my wife, 51, VP of Business Development of the same firm, thought he was refreshing. That was the word she used. Refreshing. Like a window opened in a room that had been closed too long. I should have asked whose room she meant. The evening that changed everything was a company awards dinner held at the Ballantine Hotel, late October, the kind of event where the chandeliers cost more than the bonuses. Nadine looked beautiful in a dark green dress I hadn't seen before. We sat at a table with 6 colleagues and their spouses. Jared sat 2 seats down from her. I sat across the table. The dinner went the way those dinners go. Wine that was just expensive enough, speeches that ran just long enough, applause that landed just loud enough. I was talking to the CFO about a vendor contract when I heard the laughter. Not the whole table, just one end of it. Jared's end. I turned to look. He was leaning back in his chair, arms open, performing for anyone within earshot. He said it casually, the way men say things when they want them to sound like nothing. I'm the one who takes care of her at the office. He gestured at Nadine with a loose wave of his hand. Patrick's busy saving the company from itself. Somebody has to keep her grounded. 2 of the spouses chuckled. One of the junior directors smiled into his glass. Nadine didn't flinch. She tilted her head slightly and smiled. Not at me, not at the table. At him. The kind of smile that said, do it again, I don't mind. I set my fork down. Not dramatically. Just set it down, dabbed my mouth with a napkin, and looked at Jared the way I look at a contract clause I'm about to dismantle. Then I said it quietly, just loud enough for the table to hear. That's funny, Jared. Your CEO texted you, by the way. Came through while you were talking. He blinked. His hand moved to his phone before his brain caught up. The screen lit. He read something. I don't know what, and it didn't matter, because at that exact moment Donald Keefe, Executive VP of Operations, 59 years old and allergic to embarrassment, appeared behind Jared's chair like a weather system nobody had forecast. Keefe didn't sit. He placed one hand on the back of Jared's chair and leaned down, and whatever he said was short and quiet and landed like a closed door. Jared's face went the color of the white tablecloth. He excused himself from the table. Nobody laughed now. The CFO beside me cleared his throat. The junior director found something very interesting in his dessert menu. Nadine looked at me. I looked back. I picked up my fork and finished my salmon. That was the moment I stopped pretending I didn't know what I already knew. I drove home alone that night. Nadine said she wanted to stay a little longer, catch up with a few people. I said fine. I said it calmly, the way you say things when you've already made a decision and the words are just formality. In the car, somewhere on I-485 with the city lights blurring past, I felt it, the low, steady pressure behind my ribs that my doctor had been mentioning for months. Elevated blood pressure, early arrhythmia, stress-related. He'd said, remove the source of tension from your life. Patrick. I nodded and meant nothing by it. That night, I finally understood what he meant. I didn't yell when I got home. Didn't pour myself a drink. Didn't pace the kitchen. I went to my study, pulled out a yellow legal pad, and at the top of the first page I wrote one line. What I know. What I can prove. What comes next. Then I started writing. I've spent my career reading documents other people hoped nobody would read carefully. Contracts buried in boilerplate. Liability clauses dressed up as standard language. The truth is almost always in the numbers. Not the big ones, not the headlines, but the small, unremarkable figures that nobody thinks to question because they're too boring to fake convincingly. That's where I started. The morning after the Valentine dinner, I woke up at 5:15, made coffee, and sat down at the desk in my study with 3 years of joint bank statements spread across the surface. Not printed fresh. I've been pulling these periodically for months, telling myself I was just staying organized. That's what I told myself. What I was actually doing was building a case I wasn't ready to name yet. It took me 40 minutes to find the first transfer. $1,100, 14 months ago, logged under professional consulting services to an LLC called Crestline Advisory Group. I didn't recognize the name. I cross-referenced it with the state business registry on my laptop. Crestline Advisory Group, registered 8 days before that first transfer. Single member, Jared Pullen. I sat very still for a moment. Then I kept going. Over 14 months, Nadine had moved $43,000 and change from our joint savings into that account. Never more than $3,000 in a single transfer. Always logged under language vague enough to pass a casual glance. Consulting, project support, vendor coordination. The kind of language someone uses when they know what they're hiding but want it to look like paperwork. I didn't slam the desk. Didn't knock the coffee over. I just reached for a fresh legal pad and started documenting, column by column, date by date, amount by amount. $43,000. Our money. His pocket. I picked up my phone and called Bernard Stroud. Bernard was 62, semi-retired, and the finest corporate attorney I'd known in 30 years of legal work. We'd been friends since a hostile acquisition case in 2003 that neither of us liked to talk about in polite company. When I told him I needed a meeting, not a phone call, a meeting, that day, he said, "My place or somewhere quiet?" I said somewhere quiet. We met at a steakhouse near Dilworth that opened early for lunch. I slid the folder across the white linen tablecloth before the water glasses were filled. Bernard read without expression, turning pages with the steady patience of a man who had seen worse and wasn't impressed by worse. When he got to the third page, the bank transfer summary, he set it down and looked at me over his reading glasses. "She signed all of these?" he asked. "Her account access, her authorizations." I confirmed. He nodded slowly. "That's not just a marital asset dispute, Patrick. Depending on how Crestline was structured, this could touch wire fraud statutes." I told him I was aware. I told him I wanted everything documented before I moved on anything else. He tapped the folder twice and said he'd have his paralegal start a financial trace on Crestline by end of day. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't planned on doing quite yet. I called Paige. My daughter was 29, a director of data governance at a tech-adjacent consulting firm that had been contracted by our company for the past 2 years. She used her mother's maiden name professionally, Paige Renner, and most people at the firm had no idea she was my daughter. I kept it that way deliberately. I didn't want anyone suggesting she'd gotten anything through me. She hadn't. She was sharper than most people twice her age and worked twice as hard to prove it. She answered on the second ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said. Not surprised, just quiet. That stopped me. "What do you mean?" "I mean Jared Pullen presented to our team 3 weeks ago," she answered flatly. "His so-called consultancy. He pitched us as a potential data analytics partner. Dad, there were slides. He had a logo and everything. And the case studies he cited? I ran 2 of them. They don't exist." I absorbed that. Then I asked her to send me everything she had. "Already done," she replied. "Sent to your personal email an hour ago. I wasn't going to say anything until you came to me first." She'd been waiting. My 29-year-old daughter had been sitting on evidence, protecting it, waiting for me to be ready. I told her I was proud of her. She told me not to get sentimental. Before we hung up, she added one more thing. Quieter now, the professional composure slipping just slightly. "He presented to our whole team, Dad." When one of her junior analysts pushed back on his numbers, he shut her down in front of everyone, told her to stay in her lane. A pause. She quit 2 weeks later. I didn't respond right away. Just let that land. Then I said, "Keep your records clean and your name out of it for now. I'll tell you when." I ended the call, opened my personal laptop, and found Paige's email. 12 attachments. Pitch decks, metadata logs, registration filings, a screenshot of a wire transfer Pullen had used as a proof of revenue in his presentation, traced back, with a simple search, to our joint account. I printed everything, hole punched it, added it to Bernard's folder. The case was building itself. I just had to be patient enough not to touch it before it was finished. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a man when he stops reacting and starts planning. It isn't peace. Don't mistake it for that. It's the quiet of someone who has finally decided what he's building and has started laying the foundation one careful brick at a time. Paige came to the house on a Tuesday evening, uninvited but not unexpected. She let herself in through the side door with the key she'd had since college and found me in the study exactly where she knew she'd find me, at the desk, folders spread, legal pad covered in my handwriting. She looked at the spread and didn't say a word, just set a paper bag of Thai food on the corner of the desk and pulled up the chair across from me. We ate in silence for a few minutes. Then she said, "How bad is it?" "Bad enough," I told her, "but manageable. That's the difference between bad and finished." She nodded like she'd expected exactly that answer. Then she opened her own bag and pulled out a thin manila folder. She laid it flat on the desk between us like a card on a poker table. "3 of the case studies Pullen used in his pitch to our team," she said. "I traced every company he cited. 2 are shell entities, registered in Nevada, no employees, no revenue, no web presence beyond a landing page that went live the same month he filed Crestline. The 3rd company exists, but the partnership he claimed never happened. I contacted their legal department directly, through a vendor inquiry, so there was no flag. They'd never heard of him." I picked up the folder, read through it slowly. The documentation was clean, sourced, annotated. Better than some paralegals I'd worked with. "You did this quietly?" I asked. "I did it invisibly," she replied, and there was no pride in her voice, just precision. She got that from me, and I wasn't too humble to notice. I told her what I'd found in the bank statements. Not all of it, just the shape. 43,000, 14 months, her mother's authorizations. I watched her face as I said it. She didn't flinch outwardly, but something in her jaw shifted. That small adjustment that meant she was processing something painful and filing it away to deal with later. "She funded his pitch deck," Paige said flatly. "That's what it looks like." She was quiet for a moment. Then, the junior analyst he shut down in our meeting, her name is Kirsten. She'd caught a discrepancy in one of his revenue projections. He talked over her for 3 minutes straight, called her figures intra-level thinking, and suggested she let the adults handle strategic analysis. A pause. She submitted her resignation 4 days later. I set the folder down carefully. "Is Kirsten willing to document what happened in that meeting?" Paige gave me a look that said she'd already asked. I told her I might know someone who could make sure it went to the right place. I added Kirsten's account to my notes. Another thread, another name, another weight on a scale that was already tipping hard. After Paige left, I sat with the folder for another hour. Bernard had already started the financial trace on Crestline. What Paige had brought me wasn't just supporting evidence. It was proof that Pullen had been pitching a fraudulent operation to external clients, using fabricated case studies to solicit business. That crossed a line well past corporate ethics. That crossed into territory that made the SEC's ears perk up. I didn't reach out to anyone that night. I just added it to the folder and went to bed at a reasonable hour for the first time in weeks. I slept well. That surprised me. The thing about leverage is that most people misunderstand it. They think it's about having something over someone. It isn't. Real leverage is about knowing the right people well enough that you don't have to threaten anyone. You just have to make a call, and the right machinery starts moving on its own. I made 3 calls the next morning, all before 8:30, all from my personal cell, all while standing in the kitchen with a coffee I'd let go cold. The first was to a man named Howard Briggs, retired Army intelligence, now running a cybersecurity audit practice for 4 mid-sized financial firms. Howard and I had overlapped on a vendor fraud case 7 years back, where he'd pulled metadata from a compromised internal server and handed us enough to void a $40 million contract. He was methodical, discreet, and had a genuine enthusiasm for tracking digital patterns that bordered on recreational. "I need time-stamped access logs," I told him. "Internal messaging platform. Specific user. Specific date range. And I need the metadata on a set of voice message files from a personal cloud archive." Howard asked one question. "Legally obtained?" "Every piece," I said. "Give me 48 hours," he answered, and I could hear him already moving to his keyboard. The second call was to Donald Keefe. Donald and I went back further than most people knew. We'd served together briefly, 2 years in the JAG Corps in the late 80s, overlapping for one deployment before our paths diverged. We didn't advertise it. Donald had gone into operations. I'd gone into corporate law. And somewhere along the way, we'd both landed at the same firm without ever making much of the history between us. But it was there. The kind of history that means a man picks up when you call on a Wednesday morning and doesn't ask why before he says hello. "I need to talk to you about Pullen," I said, once we'd exchanged the brief courtesies. A pause. Not surprise, consideration. "I've been watching some things," Donald replied carefully. "I know. I have a folder that'll explain what you've been watching and why." I kept my voice level. "I'm not asking you to do anything, Donald. I'm asking you to be ready to receive documentation through the appropriate compliance channel. What you do with it is your call." Another pause. Longer this time. "Then, bring it through Bernard Stroud's office. Keep your name off the cover sheet." "Already planned," I said. The third call was the one that required the most care. Her name was Vivian Marsh, executive business coach, well-regarded in Charlotte's professional women's network, a fixture at leadership seminars and corporate retreats. She had coached Nadine for the past 3 years, and, from what I had pieced together from a dozen small observations, had been a consistent and enthusiastic supporter of Nadine's involvement with Pullen. She used phrases like reclaiming your energy and breaking patterns of suppression, and apparently considered a married woman's extramarital relationship a legitimate form of professional development. I didn't call Vivian. I showed up. Her office was in a converted Victorian on Providence Road, all exposed brick and motivational typography on the walls. Her assistant told me I didn't have an appointment. I said I was aware, and that I'd only need 5 minutes, and that I was Mrs. Harlan's husband. She came out her office with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I didn't sit. I simply removed from my jacket pocket a single folded page, a copy of the HR document Nadine had signed in 2019, acknowledging a previous workplace relationship and its consequences, and placed it on the reception desk between us. I said quietly, that before you continue advising my wife on the subject of personal liberation, you might want to know this isn't her first time navigating these consequences." I'll let her look at the document for a moment. "Whatever she's told you about our marriage, there's a documented chapter she left out. I'd factor that into your next session." Vivian's smile didn't disappear. It just changed quality entirely. I thanked her for her time and left. That evening, Bernard called to tell me the Crestline financial trace was complete and that 2 of the transfer patterns appeared to constitute a structured series specifically designed to stay below federal reporting thresholds. That was no longer a marital matter. That was a federal one. I updated the legal pad. The folder was nearly an inch thick now, and I hadn't confronted Nadine, hadn't changed my behavior at home, hadn't given either of them the slightest indication that anything had shifted. From the outside, I was still just the quiet husband finishing his salmon. There's a particular satisfaction in watching someone reach for something they're certain is there and find nothing. Not cruelty. I want to be clear about that. Satisfaction. The clean, quiet kind that comes from knowing that the ground shifted because you moved it, and not a single person in the room watched you do it. I'd been planning the financial piece for 11 days. Bernard had confirmed through his forensic contact that Crestline Advisory Group had no legitimate revenue beyond what Nadine had transferred. No clients, no deliverables, no contracts, just a registered LLC, a bank account, and $43,000 of our money flowing into it in careful, threshold-conscious increments. The forensic accountant used the phrase structuring pattern in his written summary, which is a technical way of saying someone knew exactly what they were doing and did it anyway. I filed that summary in the back pocket of the folder I'd prepared for Bernard. Then I made 4 calls to the right institutions and quietly restructured everything I was legally entitled to restructure before Nadine had any reason to check. The joint savings account, closed. The shared credit line, suspended pending account review. The backup Visa tied to our household account, flagged to the fraud department for unusual activity, which triggered an automatic freeze while the bank conducted its standard review. All of it clean, all of it documented, all of it entirely within my rights as a co-account holder, initiating a separation of marital assets. I chose a Friday for the lunch. Nadine suggested it. Actually, her idea, her restaurant, the French place on Tryon Street, she liked because the lighting made everyone look a little more expensive than they were. She wore the cream blazer she reserved for meetings she wanted to win. I wore a jacket I'd had for 15 years and still fit into, which felt relevant somehow. We ordered. We made conversation about nothing. Her week, a colleague's retirement, whether we should repaint the guest room. She was performing ease, which meant she was anything but. I'd watched her perform ease for 22 years, and I could read the seams in it. When the check arrived, she reached for it the way she always did in restaurants she'd chosen. A practiced generosity that cost her nothing because she knew I'd handle the actual payment. She produced the black Amex with a small, confident smile. The waiter returned 90 seconds later with the apologetic expression all good servers develop for exactly this situation. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. This one isn't going through." Nadine's smile held for a full 3 seconds before the edges tightened. She opened her purse and produced the backup card, the Visa on our shared household account. That one came back declined too. I watched her recalibrate in real time. The slight forward shift in her posture. The eyes moving to the window, then back. The careful management of her expression in a restaurant where 3 people at neighboring tables knew her by name. She reached into the inner pocket of her blazer and produced a third card, a sleek private card I wasn't supposed to know about. She had it for about 8 months. I'd flagged it to the issuing bank's fraud division 2 days prior. Unusual activity, I'd cited. Pending review. Declined. The waiter gave me a look of professional neutrality. I handed him my card, a personal account in my name only, untouched and fully funded, and told him to run it. He did and left. Nadine set her hands flat on the table. Very still. The way she got when she was working through options and hadn't landed on one yet. "That's strange," she said, voice carefully neutral. "Is it?" I replied. She looked at me then, really looked, the performance of ease fully abandoned. Before she could speak, her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, and I watched the color change in her face the way it changes when you read something that alters the landscape of what you thought you knew. The email from our financial institution confirming the full separation of the joint accounts had arrived. She set the phone face down. "You closed everything," she said quietly. "I reorganized." I replied. "There's a difference. One is destruction. The other is clarity." "Patrick." $43,000, Nadine. I kept my voice level, almost conversational. 14 months. Crestline Advisory Group. Jared Pullins, LLC, which he registered 8 days before the first transfer you authorized. I paused to let that land without drama. That's not a mistake. That's a decision. And decisions have consequences. She stared at me. The restaurant hummed around us. Silverware, low music, someone laughing 2 tables over. Nadine's jaw moved slightly, the tell near her left temple that appeared when she was constructing a response she hoped would work. "I was helping him get started," she said finally. "It was an investment. I planned to tell you. You planned to tell me." I repeated. "In the same way you planned to tell me about the relationship itself." I folded my napkin and set it beside my plate. Bernard Stroud has a copy of the forensic summary. A second copy is with Donald Keefe's office through the compliance channel. What happens next isn't my decision. It's the institution's. She went very still. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and looked at her one last time across the table. She looked smaller than she had when we'd walked in. Not broken. Nadine didn't break easily, but recalculated, repositioned, aware, for the first time, that she'd been playing a game on a board she hadn't designed. "The guest room," I said, "can stay whatever color it is." Then I walked out into the Charlotte afternoon, and the sun was doing what Carolina's sun does in November, bright and honest, and entirely indifferent to human drama. I gave it 4 days after the lunch before I went to the office after hours. I'd arranged building access through a senior staffer in facilities management, a woman named Grace who had worked at the firm for 19 years, and whose son I'd helped place at a strong prep school 2 years back through a colleague connection. She hadn't asked why I needed access to the 14th floor at 7:15 on a Tuesday evening. She'd simply ensured the badge log would show a standard authorized entry and left a parking pass on my car that morning without a note. The floor was empty. The cleaning crew had finished the east wing and moved on. I walked to Jared Pullen's office with a particular kind of calm that comes from having rehearsed something so many times in your head that the actual doing of it feels almost routine. His desk was exactly what I'd expected from a man who wanted to project competence without demonstrating it. Spotless surface, decorative inbox tray, with nothing in it. A branded mug from a leadership conference, one motivational print on the wall that read "Execute with intention." The irony of that last item was not subtle. I placed the envelope dead center on his chair. Cream cardstock, heavyweight, no name on the front. I wanted him to feel the weight of it before he understood what it was. Inside, I had organized everything with the precision I applied to complex litigation packages. Page 1. A bank transfer summary showing $43,000 moving from our joint account to Crestline Advisory Group over 14 months, with Nadine's authorization signatures on each transaction. Page 2. The forensic accountant's summary, 3 paragraphs, clinical language, the phrase structuring patterns circled in blue ink. Page 3. Page's documentation of Crestline's fraudulent case studies, 2 shell entities, 1 falsified partnership claim, all sourced and annotated. Page 4. A formal statement from Kirsten. The junior analyst Pullen had publicly humiliated and driven to resign, now willing to document the incident in writing for HR. Page 5 was the one I'd thought about longest. It was a single printed screenshot, Pullen's pitch deck cover slide, the one he'd used in the presentation to Page's team. Across the bottom, I'd written in my own hand, pension fund clients were also approached. SEC defines this class of solicitation under Rule 10b-5. The documentation above has been preserved accordingly. I didn't sign it. Didn't need to. The last item in the envelope was a copy of a LinkedIn notification, a screenshot of a comment posted under Pullen's most recent professional update, which had been a self-congratulatory post about building something meaningful from the ground up. The comment, posted from an account belonging to a retired investment manager who had lost $18,000 in a previous Pullen-adjacent scheme, read simply, "Attached is the wire transfer you called a return on investment," with a document image beneath it. I hadn't posted that comment. I hadn't needed to. The retired investor had found Pullen on his own, through the kind of patient digital searching that angry people do when they have time and motivation. I'd simply preserved the screenshot before Pullen's team could flag it for removal. By the time I was back in my car, the envelope was on his chair, the floor was empty, and the badge log showed nothing unusual. Howard Briggs had delivered the metadata that afternoon. Timestamped access logs from the internal messaging platform showing Pullen and Nadine's communication patterns, including 17 instances of after-hours message exchanges from the office system that fell outside normal work parameters. None of the content was included. Howard had stayed cleanly within legal bounds, but the timestamps alone told a story that an HR investigator would find difficult to ignore. I forwarded the metadata to Bernard with one line, "Add to the compliance package. Keith's office receives it Thursday." Bernard replied within the hour, "Understood." The forensic accountant also flagged 2 additional transfer patterns we should discuss. "Call me tomorrow morning." I set the phone down and looked at the folder on the passenger seat. 1.5 inches thick now. Every page sourced. Every claim documented. Every thread traceable to a legitimate origin. Jared Pullen had spent the better part of a year making himself comfortable in a position he thought was secure. He'd underestimated the man at the end of the dinner table. He'd underestimated what 30 years of corporate law teaches a man about patience and paper trails. Tomorrow he would walk into his office, sit down, and find something on his chair that would rearrange the rest of his professional life. I drove home through the Charlotte night, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Steady. Absolutely, completely steady. The morning Jared Pullen walked into that conference room, he was wearing a charcoal blazer he'd posted about on LinkedIn 2 weeks prior. Something about investing in your professional image. He carried the decorative Moleskine under one arm and had the particular stride of a man who still believed the day was going to go the way he'd planned it. It wasn't. I wasn't in the room. I didn't need to be. Donald Keefe had called me the evening before, brief and specific. Everything is in order. The compliance package has been reviewed at the appropriate level. Tomorrow's quarterly strategy meeting will address it. That was all. No details, no dramatics. Donald communicated the way men do when they've spent time in situations where precision matters more than volume. I heard the rest from 2 separate sources, independently, within 24 hours. The conference room was full, 6 directors, the head of vendor relations, 2 operations leads, and a representative from the firm's internal ethics office who had been quietly added to the attendee list that morning without explanation. Jared had prepared a growth strategy presentation. 40 slides, branded templates, the kind of deck built to impress people who don't look too closely at the underlying data. He made it through 11 slides before Donald Keefe raised one hand. No words, just a hand. The room went quiet the way rooms do when the most senior person in them signals that something has shifted. Donald reached into the leather portfolio beside him and removed an envelope. Cream card stock, no label, the same weight and texture as the one I'd left on Jared's chair 2 days prior. He placed it at the center of the table and looked at Jared with the flat patience of a man who had already decided the outcome of this conversation. Before we continue, Donald said evenly, "You'll want to review what's in front of you." Jared picked it up, opened it, and I was told, by two people who were in that room, that the change in his face happened gradually, then all at once, the way a structure under load doesn't fail until it does. The professional composure, the rehearsed confidence, the easy smirk he'd carried into every room for 4 years, all of it left him in stages as he turned the pages. By the time he reached the forensic summary with the phrase, structuring patterns circled in blue, his hands had stopped moving. He just held the paper and stared at it. I think there's been a misunderstanding, he started. Donald cut him off with a single word, "Don't." Just that. Don't. The kind of word that doesn't leave room for anything after it. The ethics representative asked Jared to step outside with her. He went without argument, without the moleskine, without a word to anyone in the room. The director beside him didn't look up. The operations lead found something pressing on his laptop screen. His access badge was restricted to standard floors by end of day. His quarterly review was postponed indefinitely. A note appeared in his HR file. Not an accusation, not a termination, just a designation, subject to ongoing internal review. In corporate language, that's the equivalent of a clock starting. I found out about his LinkedIn post, the one about empires and discipline, through Paige, who sent me a screenshot with a single line of text beneath it. 47 comments. None of them are friendly. She'd added nothing else. She didn't need to. That evening I sat in my study and did something I hadn't done in a long time. I called my doctor and made the appointment I'd been postponing. Elevated blood pressure, early arrhythmia, a body carrying weight it hadn't been designed to carry alone. I sat in the examination room 3 days later while Dr. Callahan checked my pulse and asked the same question he'd been asking for 8 months. Have you addressed the primary stressor? I thought about the conference room, about Jared's face over those pages, about the envelope, the folder, the calls, the quiet machinery of consequence moving exactly as I designed it. Working on it, I told him. Almost done. He gave me a look that said he'd believe it when my blood pressure confirmed it. I told him to give me 30 days. Nadine called 3 times the week after the restaurant lunch. I let the first 2 go to voicemail. The third time, I picked up, not because I was ready to talk, but because I'd learned that avoiding a conversation entirely sometimes lets the other person believe the silence means something it doesn't. I didn't want her misreading my quiet for weakness. She wanted to meet somewhere neutral. I suggested the house. Our house, technically still shared, because I knew the advantage of familiar ground and understood that she expected me to choose somewhere public, where she could manage her composure behind ambient noise and the social contract of a restaurant. I didn't give her that. She arrived at 7 in the evening, dressed carefully, composed. She'd rehearsed. I could tell. There was a particular quality to her posture when she'd run through a conversation in advance, a slight over-readiness, like someone who'd memorized their lines and was waiting for their cue. We sat in the living room. No coffee, no offer of wine, just chairs, a lamp between us, the quiet of the house that had been holding its breath for weeks. "I know things look bad," she began, leaning forward slightly. "But Patrick, I need you to understand what was happening. I was trying to help something get off the ground. I believed in the concept. I wasn't thinking about how it would appear. Nadine." I said her name without heat, without edge, just clearly. "Stop." She stopped. "I'm not here to debate your intentions." I continued, keeping my voice at the same even register I used in depositions. "Intentions don't appear in forensic summaries. Authorizations do." I reached into the folder on the side table. She hadn't noticed it there when she came in, and removed a single document. I placed it on the coffee table between us and let her look at it without touching it. It was the HR document from 2019. Her signature, neat and deliberate, At the bottom of a formal acknowledgement, I recognized that my behavior constituted a serious lapse of professional judgment. I accept responsibility for the consequences and agree to the terms set forth by this office. She stared at it. The color in her face changed in a way I'd only seen a handful of times in 22 years. "Where did you?" she began. "It's a sealed HR record," I said. "Sealed records have administrators. Administrators have relationships with people who've done them professional favors over the course of a career." I paused. "You've been telling people our marriage broke down because I was emotionally unavailable. What you haven't told them is that this isn't the first time you've been in this situation. You signed that document yourself." She pressed her lips together. A long silence stretched between us. "That was different," she said finally. "I was younger. It was a mistake." "This is also a mistake," I replied. "A $43,000, 14-month, forensically documented mistake." I let that sit without ornament. Bernard Stroud is proceeding. The divorce filing will reflect the asset misappropriation. What Keefe's office does with the compliance findings is outside my control and yours. She looked at me then with something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not manipulation, but a kind of exhausted recognition. Like she'd reached the end of a very long performance and couldn't remember why she'd started it. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," she said softly. "Any of it." I looked at her across the lamplit space between us and said honestly, "I know. That was your only real mistake." She left 20 minutes later with the HR document in her hand. I'd given her the copy deliberately because I wanted her to carry it with her. I wanted her to feel the weight of her own signature. I locked the door behind her, stood in the hallway for a moment, then went back to my study. I added 3 notes to the legal pad, closed the folder, and put on a pot of coffee I actually intended to drink this time. The house was quiet. It had been quiet for a while, but for the first time, the quiet felt like mine. There's a particular humiliation in being escorted from a building you once walked through like you owned it. Not a dramatic scene, no security guards, no shouting, no audience. Just a quiet conversation in a small office, a badge placed face down on a desk, and a cardboard box assembled from supplies in the storage room down the hall. The kind of humiliation that's designed to be unremarkable. That's what makes it permanent. Jared Pullen was formally terminated on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the conference room meeting. Bernard had called me the evening prior, not to celebrate, just to inform, the way a good attorney reports outcomes. The firm's general counsel finalized the separation agreement this afternoon. No severance. Cause-based termination. The ethics findings made any other outcome legally indefensible. I thanked him and ended the call. I didn't go to the building that morning. I had no reason to officially, but I was in the area, a meeting 2 blocks east that ended earlier than expected, and I found myself standing at the corner of the building's main entrance at 9:20, coffee in hand, when I saw him come through the revolving doors. He was carrying a box that had already started giving way at the bottom corners from the weight inside it. A framed certificate leaning against one side. A small succulent I recognized from the LinkedIn office photo he'd posted last spring. A stack of folders he'd never needed, but had kept because they looked purposeful. His tie was crooked. His shirt collar was open at the button. The careful architecture of his professional image had collapsed overnight into something that just looked like a man having a very bad morning. He stopped on the sidewalk like he wasn't sure which direction to go. I watched him stand there for a moment. That particular stillness of a person recalibrating in public, trying not to show how lost they are. Then he turned and saw me. Something moved across his face. Not anger. He was past that. Not shame, exactly. More like recognition. The specific recognition of a man who finally understood how thoroughly he'd misread the room, and the man at the end of the table in it. I reached into my jacket and removed a final envelope. Standard business size, sealed, his name on the front in my handwriting. I walked over and held it out. He took it with a hand that wasn't bracing the box from underneath. Looked at it. Looked at me. "What is this?" he asked. His voice had none of the rehearsed ease I'd spent 4 years listening to. It was just a voice now. "Notice of termination of the Crestline business registration," I said. "The state filing was withdrawn this morning. The LLC no longer exists." I paused. "The 2 shell entities you used as case studies in your pitch materials have also been flagged to the Secretary of State's office for fraudulent registration. You'll be receiving correspondence on that separately." He stared at the envelope. Then he looked up at me, and what I saw wasn't the man who'd leaned back at that dinner table and performed for an audience. What I saw was what had always been underneath. Someone who had built everything on borrowed confidence and was now standing in the wreckage of it, holding a cardboard box and a dead succulent. "I didn't think," he started. "No," I agreed. "You didn't." I didn't say anything else. Didn't need to. I turned and walked back toward the corner, leaving him on the sidewalk with the envelope and the box and the specific, irreversible knowledge that the quiet man he'd dismissed across a dinner table had been the last person in the room he should have underestimated. Behind me, I heard the box set down on the concrete. I didn't turn around. That afternoon, Paige called me. "Kirsten submitted her formal statement to HR," she said. "Documented account of the meeting incident. They've added it to the termination file." A pause, then quieter. She said she didn't know anyone was going to use it. She said thank you. I told Paige to pass along that she was welcome, and that she should consider reaching out to Kirsten professionally when the time felt right. "Some people," I said, "are worth knowing when they're on their way up rather than waiting until they've arrived." Paige was quiet for a moment. Then, "You've been thinking about this for a long time, haven't you? Not just pulling. All of it." "Long enough," I said. "Are you okay, Dad?" The same question she'd asked me once before, weeks ago, and I deflected it. This time I didn't. "Better than I've been in a while," I told her. "Give me a little more time, and I'll be honest about it." She laughed. Small, genuine, the laugh she'd had since she was 7 years old. It was the best sound I'd heard in months. 14 months after the Valentine dinner, I stood on the porch of a house I'd built with my own hands, and a contractor named Dale who didn't ask questions and charged fair rates and showed up every day. It wasn't raining, and half the days it was. The house sat on 11 acres in the Brushy Mountains, 40 minutes northwest of Statesville. I'd purchased the land quietly 7 years ago through a property trust. A decision I'd made one Saturday morning when I was tired of concrete and ambient noise and had simply driven until the noise stopped. I hadn't told anyone about it. Not Nadine, not colleagues, not anyone. Some decisions are private not because they're secrets, but because they belong entirely to you, and the act of announcing them to the world changes their nature. The house was modest by the standards I'd lived by for 20 years. 3 bedrooms, a wide covered porch, a study with south-facing windows that would get good light year-round. I'd overseen every detail of the build during the divorce proceedings, driving up on weekends while attorneys exchanged documents and institutions processed findings, and Jared Pullen's name moved through regulatory channels the way a stone moves through deep water, slowly, inevitably, toward the bottom. The divorce had been finalized 8 months prior. The asset settlement reflected what Bernard had documented. The marital estate was divided with the full weight of the financial misappropriation factored in, which meant Nadine's portion was considerably smaller than she'd anticipated when she'd first retained her attorney. Her counsel had argued. Bernard had produced documentation. The judge had read it carefully and ruled accordingly. Crestline Advisory Group had been dissolved. 2 state fraud referrals were pending. The SEC had opened a preliminary inquiry into the pension fund solicitations, which meant Jared's name was now attached to a federal process that would follow him in every professional context for years, regardless of outcome. The firm had promoted Donald Keefe to Chief Operating Officer 4 months after the conference room meeting. He'd call me personally to share the news, which was more than protocol required. I congratulated him and asked about his knee, which he'd been managing since a parachuting incident in 1987. He said it was fine. I said I was glad. Paige had been offered a senior director position at her firm, which she'd accepted with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything. She came up to the Mountain House twice during the build, once to see the framing, once to see the finished kitchen, and both times she stood in the space with her hands in her jacket pockets and looked around with an expression I recognized as the one she used when she approved of something but wasn't going to make speech about it. The second visit, she brought a plant, a small, hardy fern in a clay pot that she set on the kitchen windowsill and said would survive anything. I thank her for it. She told me not to get sentimental. On this particular November morning, I was sitting in the wooden chair I'd positioned at the corner of the porch where you could see both the tree line to the east and the open field to the west. The air was cold enough to see your breath, but the sun was doing what mountain sun does in the late fall, cutting clean and low through the trees and warming everything it touched. A thermos of coffee sat on the rail beside me. An open legal pad rested on my knee, though I hadn't written anything on it yet. My doctor had called the previous week with updated readings. Blood pressure, normal. Resting heart rate, normal. He'd said, "Whatever you did, keep doing it." I'd said I intended to. From somewhere on the property, in the stand of oaks at the east edge of the field, a dog moved through the dry leaves, nose down, fully absorbed in whatever investigation had captured his attention. Chester was 4 years old, a mixed breed I'd adopted from shelter in Mooresville 6 months ago on an afternoon when I'd driven past the sign twice, stopped on the third pass, and walked out 40 minutes later with a dog who had looked at me with the frank assessment of someone who had been waiting and was relieved to be done with it. He found something in the leaves, sniffed it with great ceremony, and then abandoned it with equal ceremony and trotted back toward the porch, tail moving with the satisfied rhythm of an animal who has no unfinished business. He settled at my feet and put his head down. I looked out the field, the tree line, the sky that went on longer up here than it ever seemed to in the city. I thought about 30 years of rooms and deals and documents, and the particular silence of a man who has finally built something that belongs only to him. Some men spend their whole lives waiting for a moment of complete clarity. I'd found mine on 11 acres in the Brushy Mountains, on a porch I'd helped nail together board by board, with a thermos of good coffee and a dog who asked nothing of me except that I keep showing up. That I could do. That was something I was very good at.